Hi, this is, this is,
Steve got in. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
yes, I can, yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, this is,
Steve got in. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
yes, I can, yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, this is,
Steve got in.
What happened to Steve? You've a lot less hair going on, Steve.
Here I am. I think I finally figured it out.
and Steve looks like he has a lot less hair because he shaved it. Mine just fell out. That's all that happened. So,
Well, Steve was muted, so we didn't get to hear the explanation.
yeah, right.
Oh, so you didn't hear me talking at all?
No,
Oh, well, that was to your advantage then. I just saying I got them all cut and it's kind of nice to have short hair again.
it's so short it made me think you used to have a mustache.
Still have the mustache. It's just so white you can't see it.
Okay.
That comes with age. Right, Mr. Dopp?
It does blend after a while, yes.
I know Catherine isn't able to be here today, so I believe we're just waiting for the chair. Let me make sure he's not in the audience. I don't see him there, so I know he's coming.
Leila, you got my note about maybe needing to, oh, she left. Mike, you got my note regarding maybe the need to, yes, okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hoping too that we won't need the full 2 hours. I just didn't want you to be limited in anything you wanted to say.
We find Dave yet? Oh, here he comes.
It's logging in. Yeah, good.
Here he comes.
Okay. I think that is everyone, right? I think we were just missing Catherine. So we know she's not coming. So I think with that, we're technically still in fiscal year 22. So the budget committee chair is still Dave Dillon. And so I think with that, I will hand the agenda over to Dave to get us started. Although he may be frozen, unless that's me.
Looks like he might have got dumped.
I don't need, there he is.
There he is.
Mhm.
You're muted, Dave.
I got it. Can anybody hear me now?
There you go.
You can hear me. That's too bad. Okay, good. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'd like to call to order this pre-budget meeting of the Manzanita Budget Committee. And by way of introductions for the watchers who are not on the panel, can we start by introducing yourselves? Well, I'm Dave Dillon. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. Anybody else next? Leila?
Sure, thanks, Dave. Layla Aman, city manager, also your budget officer. With that, I'll hand it to Councilor Spegman.
Jerry
Hey,
Spegman,
Jay.
City. Jerry
Go ahead.
Spegman, City Councilor.
Linda Kozlowski, City Councilor.
Constantia, City Council.
Just saying, I got them all cut. I'm assuming we're introducing ourselves. I
Anybody else
lost you
next?
for a while. I'm
Leila?
not sure what happened, but Steve Nuttall was city council.
Chip Greening,
Am I the last one? Here, I thought we were going to do a little long-winded speech. I had a little speech written out, but I'm Mike Scott. I'm the city mayor, and I'm looking forward, as I know all of you are, to working with Leila on this, her first budget. So
How about Jim?
Jim
sorry, I
Dopp.
was,
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm Jim Dopp, member of the Budget Committee.
Hickey?
sorry, I was muted. Jim Hickey, member of the Budget Committee.
We got Chip. I think that's everybody. Okay. Mike, you're on.
I thought I already talked.
Well, it looks like we might have lost the chair again, so. we'll just-
Dave's running the meeting, not me. We lost him again?
I think we lost him.
We did, yeah. Well, it's nice to meet you, Jim and Jim. I haven't met the Squarespace or in person yet, so looking forward to working with you.
And you?
Looking forward to it as well.
Let's see.
Looked like Dave took a powder already.
You may have internet problems.
I was having problems too, so I'm not sure on which end it is, but you guys just disappeared on me for about a minute.
Dave says I'm having trouble checking in. Just had to restart.
Okay.
Back soon.
I didn't hear staff jump in, but we do have staff here too. I have the chief, Scott's here as well as Nina. So, and I think, let's see, Dan. He's here. Oh, I'm gonna promote Dan here. Or maybe Nina can, if she can hear me.
No
We just
problem.
have 3 people in the attendees. Could you promote Dan to the?
Got it.
Thank you. That way staff's here just to hear and listen in and be ready.
Mhm.
Great, Dave.
So did I miss anything?
Nope, we've been waiting for you.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
I
Yes,
can't.
yes.
Bummer.
Can you hear us?
Obviously not.
Yeah.
Hi, Dave. No.
Hello,
There you are.
I'm not hearing anybody but myself, so. Just a second. How's that?
Good for us.
We can hear
Okay,
you.
good. I had my speakers off, sorry.
Oh, good.
So what did I miss? Is the meeting over? Sorry.
And we're adjourned. No, I'm just kidding. We were waiting for you, Dave. We have not even started. We introduced ourselves. We've all gotten to know each other.
Frozen again.
You know, Layla, I think with everything, maybe it would be just good for you to start through the agenda or have the mayor start through the agenda and then Dave can do the technical, whatever he needs to maybe join them sometime.
Yeah, and he
That's
can, that's a great, I'm happy to do that. And Dave, I don't know if you can hear us, but Dan said if you want to pop by the office, you're welcome to do that, pop into Public Works. So. He's back. Okay. Well, Dave, if we lose you again, we'll just kind of keep moving forward. Is that cool? I think you're muted now.
He's only about a block from Public Works. He could just pop over there if you want.
Yeah, that's what Dan said. Well, anytime, I'm just gonna jump to the calendar. Since that was the next thing, is that good? Okay, on the
Yeah, go ahead.
agenda. Let's give me 1 second. I'm sure I can get participant sharing here in a second. I handed the reins over, so bear with me. All right, well, thank you. Well, I wanted just to get everyone's kind of thumbs up on the schedule. So just, obviously, we're doing a cut things a little bit differently this year, starting with having some pre-budget meetings. And selfishly, this first budget meeting is really about me getting to know you and kind of hearing your thoughts on how things went previously. But to start, I wanted to just get your feedback and make sure everyone was comfortable with the budget schedules proposed, and then we will publish this. This will become our actual schedule. So starting with the pre-budget meeting today, I'm proposing a second pre-budget meeting in April, and we'll go into a little bit more detail and maybe discuss some of what those agenda items might be today. And then I'm proposing, I think in the past, you've received the budget a couple of days before the budget hearing, the first budget committee meeting. And I'm proposing to get that to you at least a week in advance, and if sooner if we can. So I'm proposing that will be May 2nd, and then the first budget committee meeting to receive the budget would be May 9th. If needed, the second meeting happening on May 10th, and then the May 18th would be for having the public hearing and including uses for state revenue sharing. So that meeting would occur on the 18th, and then proposing the budget be adopted by council on the 15th of June.
Layla, aren't the times on the first two pre-meetings been changed to 1 o'clock?
Oh, they have. Yep. Sorry about that. 1 p.m. And I'll reserve 2 hours. We may not always need it, but that will be it. And then the budget committee meetings would occur at 4 p.m. on the 9th and the 10th if needed. And then the 18th would be at a regular hearing time. So I'll stop sharing so you can look at each other. Is there general consensus around? I should just ask, are there any conflicts with that schedule? Barring none. Thumbs up from the chair. So we're going to go ahead and ink it. That is our schedule. Thank you. I've now set deadlines for myself. So onward we go. Great. Okay. Should I just continue forward, Dave? Or all right. Feels good. So the next item on the agenda is, well, this is really for me, and it's selfishly the purpose of having this meeting, which is, this is a seasoned budget committee. So I'm really glad that I get to work with some folks who've been through Manzanita's process. I've been through a number of different city budget processes, either at the city of Portland or Milwaukee or at Metro, but every jurisdiction kind of has a unique, but the same approach. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk to me and to share with me a little bit your experience in the last few years or your experience on the committee. If there are specific things that you're interested in seeing, just kind of a debrief on kind of what worked last year, what can maybe be done better this year. My hope is that you'll not try to pile on every hope and dream you ever have on the budget committee for me this year, but it is a good time for us to reflect and look back as a way to help us figure out how to move forward. So I would invite members of the budget committee to just, open up this for a discussion on kind of what worked well and what are the things that you would hope to see this year. And that's why largely I've invited staff to come too, because I want them to hear from you the things that you're interested in learning about. What are the things that are most important to you during budget? And again, we'll try to get to most of it, but it would just be very helpful for me to hear that. So I'm going to step back, and if anyone wants to start, I would welcome you to do so. Chip, why don't you jump in? Thank you.
I think it would be helpful in light of what Councilor Spegman said at the last meeting, that when making a revenue forecast, especially for an uncertain revenue item like the STR taxes, that we have a high, low, best guess. So we understand the process of how you arrived at. I realize the format required by the state does not allow you to put a high, low, and best guess, but it would be helpful to the budget committee to understand what your thinking is, what the staff's thinking is.
Thanks, Chip. I think that could be applicable to a number of the different revenue sources I would expect as well. So it's been my experience in the past to sort of articulate where some of those estimates are coming from. So like, for example, building permit revenue and things like that, we make estimates about what growth will be based on certain factors. So we can do that. That's a great suggestion.
Can I continue on a couple more questions as long as I have the floor? Another one is that there is, I think, a confusion among citizens about the difference between revenue sources that are intended to be cost recovery items and revenue sources that are used for the general fund or dedicated to other funds. I understand, especially building permits, for example, are a source of fees. So not only providing the revenue forecast, but helping us to understand which of those are cost recovery items. I think I've spoken to Scott, and he has suggested, I think, that about half of his compensation, for example, is general fund and half is the cost recovery, or what he called protected. And when I look at the funds, I'm not sure I understand where in the funds those cost recovery revenues are, in quotes, protected. So I would really like to understand what Scott means by that, protected, meaning they have to be used for building fees or whatever.
Yeah, and I can answer that now, or I can wait. So
Go ahead.
I could go ahead and answer it now. So one of the big changes we'll see in this year's budget is that we will actually be creating a building fund. So Scott is correct. The fees that are generated through certain permits through the building department are restricted and can only be used to fund the building department. That's been the case since we've had a building department, but the building department's always run in deficit up until last year. So last year, we believe, is the first year that the building department started running in the positive. So I'm actually working with the auditor right now to determine what the beginning fund balance is. But we're taking the fees that were generated through the building department. Those are going to be set over into a separate fund. And the building department will now have its own fund. And so it will operate similarly to like how the water fund is, for example. It's a separate restricted fund. So we will be transferring general fund into that to cover the part of the operations that Scott in his position is general fund focused. So that's the first time. It's something I noticed when I came here, as it's been in my experience that building funds are separate funds. Right now it operates as a department within the general fund. And so those are very different things. So that will be a big change to probably the biggest structural change to the budget, is it will be isolating those funds. And so then Chip, it'll start to be reported that way in our financial reports, and it will start operating in the same way that we restrict water funds, for example. So before, I think it was kind of mixed in because we were subsidizing the building department. But we now see that that's got to change.
So as a follow-up question, you mentioned water funds, but this building fund will be a government fund, not an enterprise fund,
yes,
correct?
Exactly. And I don't want to get too mixed up in that. I'm just saying it operates separately like that. But yeah, it's not an operating fund. It is, yeah.
Will where are the system development charges going to go? They also sort of fall into that cost recovery category.
SDCs right now fall into the funds in which they support. So system development charges for parks go into the parks facility fund. System development charges for storm goes into the storm drain fund, and system development charges for water go into the appropriate water fund.
Are those identified as SDCs? Is the revenue there identified as SDC in the fund?
I think so, if I understand your question correctly.
Well, so what I want to ask is whether if I look at the Parks Fund or the Storm Drain Fund, I can see that a revenue item, a line item says system development charges, and there'll be a number there.
Yes.
Okay.
Layla, can I interrupt Chip long enough to ask about, I was a little surprised to hear 50% building fund versus 50% general fund in building with the level of activity that we have. One of my things would be to try to move as much as we can of the building department, particularly the building official, and maybe some other staff members, so that they're more of 100% cost recovery. Because other than short-term rentals, and probably there's some other things I don't know about, but it seems as though that's a cost recovery effort. And so if we can detail that, if you haven't already, you probably already planned to do that, but it hit me that 50% was high for general fund use of a building department.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilor Nuttall, and I would strongly agree, and I think the building official would too. So we've already had a discussion about that, and we can, when we describe the budgets, I think you're going to see that the cost recovery for building official be much higher. So I'll be sure to note that when we present the budget to you and let you guys know what the percentage breakdown is for that position. But I do expect it based on the hours that the building official spends doing building work. It's probably closer to 80% building official.
And then I guess the other thing about that would be to transition away from the expertise of a building official doing routine type inspections of short-term rentals.
Yes.
It's just not a very cost-effective way to do business. So
not at all.
So that would be, I guess, another component to be looking at.
Yeah, and I'll public service announcement that we've extended the timeline for the planning and permit tech, which will take on some of those short-term rental inspections. And we've extended the timeline to hopefully get more applicants to do exactly that. But thank you. Great. This is great.
Layla, I have one specific item.
Yes, please.
So there used to be a committee called the Off-Season Tourism Promotion Committee, and I believe that committee is basically, we didn't formally de-ratify it, but it's not meeting any longer. All of those positions have expired, those terms. And I think there's been consensus that the city probably doesn't need an off-season tourism promotion effort any longer. So I believe that prior budgets, an amount was just kind of decided that would be appropriate to move towards those grant applications that were made for that use. Going into the pandemic, a decision was made for us to distribute essentially all of the funds that had accumulated for the committee's use. Were distributed to all of the businesses in town that had some kind of direct contact with tourism. Obviously, there have been a couple of good years of taxes collected since then. So I'll be interested in the budget to see how that fund has recovered. And what this is the 70% of the 2% increase when the city moved from a 7% room tax to a 9%. And I've just been trying to pay attention to the fact that 70% of that 2% tax increase, we need to kind of be paying attention to how that's being used for tourism facilities or promotion. And promotion, I think, is taking a very distant backseat now. But going forward, it'll be interesting to see what funds are available there and how they might be used for facilities that might benefit visitors, but locals alike.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to what Hans just said. You mentioned in an earlier council meeting that you intend to restructure the visitor center management so that activities that are now undertaken by city staff that are more appropriate for the visitor center are somehow moved over to the visitor center, so that since they are legit, the example you gave was people calling about weddings or other events. And I understand now the Tillamook Coast Visitor Association is temporarily managing the visitor center and is working on a destination management plan. Will your new vision for the visitor center be ready for the budget process?
No. Not at all. And thank you for asking. So yes, so TCVA is overseeing the sort of training and has someone working at the visitor center right now. And we have not yet kicked off the destination management plan. So that's something I'm going to be meeting with Nan about next week to start to move forward with that, because I think that there's going to be some community engagement that needs to happen. We're talking about tourism, and that's a big thing for many folks that live, work, and play here. So I want to make sure that we have adequate time to do the outreach that we need to around that plan. So I expect that'll take a few months. And then the recommendations, I see that being a 3 to 6 month process and a good day. So I would expect by next budget cycle, we will actually have a much more clear understanding of how that money will be spent in specific projects or facilities, as Councilor Tonjes noted, that we could spend that on. So that's what I'm aiming for that. One thing I will mention, so that is true, one of the responsibilities I'd like to see sort of transfer to that position are things that are events that are trying to attract people from outside of the community. Other events like things around emergency planning and so forth, I think the city would still just manage those. One of the things I'm working on, I was going to talk about it in the next section, but no harm in talking about it now, is I am working with the city attorney to try to identify some additional uses for that money. And one of the things I'm exploring with them right now, and I don't yet have a solid answer, but it's looking promising, is the use of those resources to operate and maintain facilities. So we can use that money to build a facility. We have not historically as a city allocated resource to operate and maintain that facility. So for example, the visitor center itself, Public Works spends a significant amount of time getting that place clean and up to speed. The maintenance of the restrooms, we provide oversight to the IT. So I pay someone from the administration budget to oversee the IT that is part of that building. We deal with the maintenance and all of that. And so one of the things I'm working with the city attorney on is to determine whether or not those promotion funds can also be used to offset city costs, which are not insignificant, to manage and operate tourist facilities, which in my mind equate to the restrooms, to the dog food stations, and to all of the kind of hard material associated with those facilities. So that's another way I'm looking at that resource as well, because I think it's one thing to tell us that we can use the money to build a facility, but then to say that we can't use the resource to operate and manage it, it seems defensible to me. So we'll see if the city attorney agrees. And if so, then part of my budget proposal will include some, and I'll highlight them, of course, changes to potentially how some positions are funded, and certainly some materials such as bags and other stuff that we end up paying out of the general fund.
Layla, I had two other issues. I'm not sure if this is the place where.
Feel free.
Okay. So I had two other things that I wanted to at least discuss. One is, well, actually three. One is parks, and I brought this up during our last budget committee sessions, that I think we often kind of short shift the parks. And I'd like to see some at least some process going in, and maybe Dan has words for this, but in at least some comments to maybe upgrade our efforts towards our city parks. In the past, we haven't done a whole lot, but I think as we tend to be growing and more people coming, that having nice parks, well-maintained parks, maybe bigger parks, more parks. I just would like to see us spend a little more time than, we spent 3 minutes talking about the line item, and then that's about all we talk about. So that's one. Two, I also don't know where we're at on our salary study. And since we're in an inflationary cycle right now, whether that's going to have a significant impact on us, I don't know. And maybe you are not prepared to comment before the council sees that salary study, but it's something I've been thinking about, because it's not going to be business as usual as we've had in the past. And then the third thing that I have not forgotten, and that's Chief Harth will like to hear this, is the standby time for the police officers. And I'm sure that you've got that on your radar relative to how we're going to try to handle that, because last year we discovered that was not a good situation. So.
Thank you. Those are all great comments. I can speak to the first two. So the parks, and I'm glad you brought that up. Dan and I are actually going to be proposing something in the budget to do an update of the parks master plan, because in order to fund parks, we need a funding source, which would be system development charges. And I think looking at updating, because I agree, I think parks are an important part of this community, and we do have a plan, but it's pretty dated. And so we're looking at that and sort of scoping out what it might cost to do an update to that parks plan that could then lead to system development charge analysis as well, so that whatever plan we come up with, we also potentially have a funding source for that for council to consider. So obviously we won't do that for this budget, but we're planning in this budget to do it in the next budget cycle. The salary survey, I got the results last week. I spent all weekend putting together a couple of scenarios. I would just say I'm not supposed to talk about numbers particularly at this meeting, and I'll be bringing, I'm waiting on one thing from, that's that TLT decision from the city attorney, which will influence kind of where I fall in the range of what I recommend. The impact of inflation is going to be significant. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's running higher, I think, than we all know since 1982. So we're looking around 7% adjustment. So it's not insignificant, but I'm feeling hopeful about what I'm seeing, and feel really good about the salary survey that we got back. And just, quickly, we'll just small editorial is just, this is a super solid team. And so I'm looking forward to the proposal that I do bring to you. But yeah, the hit from inflation was not what I expected when I took this job almost a year ago. So I think we'll be
well, just speaking for one member of the council, I'm willing to forego my cost of living increase if that is helpful to you.
Thank you.
That is very generous, Steve.
So generous, very generous.
May solve all the problems.
Yeah.
Good to go. You guys are the best value, I'll tell you.
0 times 7% is still 0, Steve.
It took me a second. I was like, what? Funny. Funny. Thank you. Okay, great.
I want to let you know I'm back. I walked over to Dan's office.
Yay!
Yay!
Welcome.
So sorry
Okay.
about that. We're a half block apart, but didn't want to stay online. So I'm here.
No, good to have you take over now, Dave. We were just talking about the salary survey and costs, and I was just letting folks know I got the salary survey, and I'm working on a proposal, and that, yes, inflation's going to have an impact. Big one.
What about retention? We are looking ahead on personnel retention. I don't know if you guys talked about that while I was gone, but I know our police department is just fine, but there can always be turnover. So what are your thoughts on that? What are other small governments doing?
Well, I will say that our salary survey kicked off a lot of interest, and I think at least 3 of the comparable cities that we talked to are going to be updating their salary surveys, and the city managers I've been in touch with in this region are deeply concerned about retention. I'm starting to get very concerned about recruitment. We've had a job out on the street now for 3 weeks, and I'll just say we've extended it for another 2 weeks to get applicants. And so I think it is a concern, and the way to get at that is the only way that we can, which is through the limited resources we have. So I think offering the best package that we can is one way to do that. But other cities like ours were constrained by resources. And so I think that the biggest threat to us in terms of retention is neighboring communities having higher paid positions than we do. And we do have a handful of those, and a handful of positions in particular that are challenged. And I think that the salary survey results, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to share those publicly yet, but I think the recommendations that come out of that will be helpful in moving us in the right direction. And the proposal that I will be putting forward has retention at top of mind. I'll say this again and again, is right now the team that I have is the team that I want. And so I think, I think people are generally happy, but we're all kind of, I think every city in this region, every city in the state or the country is dealing with this right now. So
what other benefits do we offer in addition to salary? I know there's state retirement, which is good. As a guy who lives on a pension, I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
But the people who provide my pension print the money, so that's a little different.
That's true. So we're pretty generous when it comes to, and not generous, I think it's the standard, honestly, for public service, which is that we cover the 6% employee pickup as well as the 6% for PERS. So the city covers PERS. I've actually made job decisions based on whether or not a city covers that. We also cover 94% of the premium for health insurance, which will be going up somewhat this year. What we don't provide is, we do not provide, and we're pretty good relative to paid leave. So our paid leave is fairly competitive. I'm just looking at the study. The one thing we don't provide that was recommended is we don't provide, and I've never had this happen either, life insurance. So we're the only city in our comparables that don't provide life insurance. And we also don't provide a match to like a 401k savings. So a number of cities also offer that. And then flex spending was another benefit that some cities had. But life insurance and then the 401k match would be other benefits that the city doesn't provide.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Leila, I know that you've had a couple of situations as you've been implementing the current fiscal year budget where you've run some surprises and maybe some things that you might have envisioned doing differently if you were on board last year. And I think it would be really helpful since you are a fresh set of eyes and there are some new members on the budget committee, at least in the relatively recent past. I think it'd be really helpful if you could sort of preview for us any big structural or operational items you've noticed and are making some changes in or suggesting some changes in. Is that the kind of thing you would be doing at this second pre-meeting?
Yeah, and I can get into more detail on anything that we discussed here today. But yes, I can give you some big picture stuff that I have just sort of a list. It's more, this meeting was intended to be a little more informal. But that's a great point. I mean, I think that the building fund, that's probably going to be the biggest structural shift. The use potentially of the restricted transit lodging tax, the promotion funds for specific things will also be a new thing. There's, as part of my salary proposal, I am proposing just a slight reorganization. So you can expect to see that, but I don't think that's anything terribly dramatic. I think in terms of spending, still just sort of distilling that right now, but it was interesting taking, I think I brought the budget to adoption on my third week here and how I've spent relative to the plan that was in place. There's a few differences, but not a lot actually, and the things that were different were unanticipated things that ended up costing us money, but you always should have some contingency built in. And I think there's some resiliency in the budget, so I'm not worried about it. But there might be some little things that start to go away too. And I would like to note that, so I've been working with Jerry Taylor as sort of a mentor on the budget, just asking lots of questions. I will be really clear that this is my budget that I'll be bringing you, and that the department heads have also been playing probably a greater role than they have in the past, just working with me on the budget. But the point of bringing up Jerry is he's been really helpful to, as I look at things and I'm like, hey, why is this here? So I have that background. And I think confidence to say if there's going to be some shifts. So there's a couple line items in there that are 5 figures that have just been sitting around for a while. And, I clarified that with him, for example, so you'll see those go away, but I will talk folks through that. So it's a long answer to your question, which is to say, generally, I think we're tracking pretty good. We're going to see some big changes in those 2 categories, potentially the TLT and the building fund. And then the team will be able to walk you through any sort of, to me, significant changes or things that are a few $1,000s or more that you're used to seeing that are going to go away. So I'm cleaning up house a little bit too, and really diving in deep to like, what are our bills and how much are we spending, and just refreshing a lot of that data. I'm dreaming in spreadsheets right now. So does that answer your question?
One other quick question. So I think I was probably the only first-time member last year on the budget committee, and I thought the level of questioning was fairly modest, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. But I think Steve alluded to the fact that the sort of the grind of the meeting, you're inundated with a bunch of line items, and there's only so much you can expect to really learn if you want to get through all those line items with the clock running. So when the budget is sent to members of the committee a week before that first meeting, is it appropriate for us to come to you with all questions, or go to the relevant department heads with all questions, or hold all questions until the first meeting? What would your preference be?
All. So we would want to get any kind of questions you have in advance, because if you bring them all to the meeting, they could be clarification questions that we can address ahead of time. There's just a number of things that we could help you with that would make the meeting run more efficiently. So that would be my ask, and you're welcome to go straight to the department head. I just ask that I'm always copied on communication with my staff, just so that I can be up to speed with what's going on. So I think preferably my request would be maybe to the budget committee to submit your questions to me, and then I'll send them out to the staff as necessary, to feel free to do so at any time. And then of course, if there are substantive questions that you want to discuss in the meeting, we can absolutely have those discussions at the budget committee meeting.
Thanks.
Leila, can I ask one more thing? And I know that we're in the midst of overtime developing CIP, but is there a process that we can use this year that would be able to capture all of our capital expenditures, even if they have to be taken from various department budgets? But it would be nice to see one document that shows all capital expenditures, for at least for me, which would kind of be the beginning of a capital improvement plan.
Can I build on that before you answer, Leila, which is that what we see in the budget meetings is a fund transfer. So 60,000, for example, went into the storm drain fund. So it would be helpful to link what Steve is asking for, the project list expected to be for the fiscal year, plus some idea of where those general funds are going to underwrite those projects. Meaning, if they're going to be a storm drain project, is that what the 60,000 transfer is for, plus additional revenue? So we see a linkage. I think to Jerry's question, which is, sometimes there are these transfers happening and you can't figure out why the transfer is happening or what the money is going to be used for.
Those are great points, and thank you. Yes, we will have a list for the fiscal year for capital projects. Dan and I have already been talking about that, and then how they're funded. That's a great suggestion, and knowing that's exactly the kind of information I want right now, is that's going to help us prepare. So we'll have that prepared for you, because I agree. And then in the meantime, part of what we're doing is in building the capital plan is, as we think forward about, for example, the Parks Master Plan, that's a step forward to starting to build a capital plan. Chip, just to quickly answer, there isn't a one-to-one relationship necessarily to the transfers into the funds, because we lack enterprise funds to fund capital projects and things like storm. We just have the general fund basically feeds that fund. So it's not even a fund, it feeds that department. So we transfer that because that's kind of historically what we've been doing. And then when we have enough in the fund, we then do a project. And so that's one of the things that I'll be working with this council on in the coming year, is as we diversify our revenue, that's one of the things we have to figure out, is how do we replace funding capital projects that could actually qualify for expansion with other resources. And so a system development charge that maybe actually equals the impacts, as opposed to what we charge now, which certainly does not. And so there won't be that one-to-one relationship. I just want to be really clear about that, but we certainly should be indicating on our project list where those funding sources are coming from the projects that we're anticipating for the year. So that I can do. But does that help clarify?
So I understand. So if you have a project and it could have multiple funding sources, well, have you considered the idea that many other tasking districts do, which is to have a capital projects fund, so that you could match up your capital projects with funding source in the capital projects fund? So whether it's general fund or state revenue or whatever it is, can be transferred to the capital projects fund, which then is the source of funding.
Yeah, I see where you're headed. At this point, kind of one of the things I'm trying to do with this budget too is to not create any more funds that I don't like. I have to create a building fund. We have a lot of funds. And so I want to be mindful of that. I think the CIP will address that because in the CIP, you can list multiple funding sources for a project. So a project can get money from general fund, it can get it from the road fund, it can get it from whatever, and you list that out in the CIP. That's how I would propose doing it. And next year I might have some recommendations for cleaning up some of our funds too, because we have a few that are somewhat underutilized and it's just one more fund to manage. But I hear what you're saying. I feel like that'll be resolved through the CIP.
Well, I agree with you that especially for those of us when we were new to the budget committee, the whole idea of all these funds was confusing. And I think for citizens, it's confusing because it's not the way they run their, people don't, for example, I think Warrenton has 29 funds, or maybe it was Cannon Beach, I can't remember. And then, but as citizens, we don't have 29 bank accounts into which we put little bits of money to pay for something that we plan in the future. So I'm not suggesting the addition of a capital projects fund as long as we see the source of the funding. We see the project list and the source of funding.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we can do that certainly for the projects for this fiscal year. And then I think that should address what you're asking for too, I think, Councilor Nuttall, I hope. So, but that's great. Agreed. That's a good suggestion. This is great. What else? I want to make this the best budget year possible.
Leila, is there going to be any anything new relative to public safety in the budget as far as how we see it or how we viewed it in the past? Or and I remember, Chip, last year you had some questions. Can't remember exactly what they were, but I think they were all answered back then. But I'm just wondering if we're going to see anything different there.
Tell me more about what you mean. I may not be entirely familiar with the conversation.
Well, I'm just, I can't, Chip, maybe you can enlighten it, but it's, I remembered that there was some discussion about public safety, possibly, maybe the way it was funded. I can't remember exactly, Chip, maybe you can enlighten me, but I remember, I always thought it was kind of still outstanding. And
well, there was, yeah, there. Chief Harth will remember that Catherine Stock and I had a long sit-down meeting with him a while back, and what we were trying to do is to understand what the police officers are spending their time on, and this is not asking police officers to fill out timesheets. They actually already do it. And so it was, to us, it was helpful to understand the activities to which the police force devotes itself. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Harth, but they already have the semblance of that kind of report, which is, here's what we spent time on. And what I was really interested in then was ensuring at least cost recovery, if not a small amount of profit from the loan of our police officers to the park and our two adjacent cities. I was also trying to understand how much time the police officers were spending covering for the sheriff before the sheriff arrives. For example, again, Chief Harth can clarify this, but an incident might happen in an unincorporated area, but because our police force is the closest one, they might respond and hold the fort, so to speak, until the sheriff gets there, or they might do some work for the sheriff. There's nothing wrong with that. It's only that if I want to make sure that we are not covering for the sheriff for things that the sheriff should be paying for, not us.
Thank you. That's what I remember now.
Yeah, that's helpful. And what we can do, this is something Eric and I talk about, and when he does his budget presentation, we can have some of that information included in there. And he also, if you missed it, did a great update. I say it was in November on just sort of what PD does, and just encourage folks to watch that, get a good sense of what these good folks do for us every day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
If I can, a couple general comments. I really appreciate the idea that the budget's probably coming out a little bit earlier than it has in the past, a little more time to digest and get a handle on what we're looking at really helps. And along those lines, I had talked earlier about the idea of being able to pre-send questions to staff about various items in the budget that might have changed or that I don't quite understand or whatever. And I like the idea, and I would very much hopefully have a single point, you being the single point for those questions, even if you think you know where that question is ultimately going to land, whether it's in the police department or public works or whatever. It's not, I think it's really appropriate if you know what's being questioned and by who and how much. So I think the single point of reception for those is really important.
Great.
And I like the idea of being able to get some heads up prior, some answers to questions prior to that first budget meeting. One of the worst things is having a question that you know is going to require some staff time to bring together a few pieces of information to have and put staff on the spot at a budget meeting of saying, well, I don't really know the answer to that. I could probably, and we don't have a good way of going away and putting together that stuff and then coming back to the meeting and airing it. So being able to air that prior to and get the answers before that meeting would be nice. And those are my only comments, I think.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And I would concur. I think that's, I'm glad to do that. So I will be your main point of contact. And Jim brings up a good point that we're also expecting you to read the budget and get ahead of it and ask your questions ahead of time, so that we can have, our job is to make sure you're fully prepared and understand, so that we can communicate this well to you and to the public. So we're happy to provide that, and we'll, try to keep ourselves completely available that week, between the time we deliver the budget and have our meeting. But yeah, use me as your main point of contact here forward.
Let's take I-10 West. This route is a
Wasn't me.
It wasn't me. I'm here.
Where that came from.
Okay. Well, between now and when we meet again I'm looking at my wall of dates, we're on the 18th, right? Oh, sorry, 13th. If something comes up, if you think about something that you wish you would have said, please let me know. Anything that we can be prepared for in advance will just be really helpful. We're working really hard here. I will say that I have a great team, but Mina Aiello, who's here today, she's going to be taking a bigger role in the budget than she has in the past and here forward. So she's done a tremendous job pulling everything together. This is my first year in this city, so trying to learn a new system. We're doing pretty good on our end, but we appreciate your understanding as we sort of navigate this water. And just again, Jerry Taylor has been a huge help, just with the historical institutional knowledge, and then having Dan and Eric and Scott as well. They're doing a huge heavy lift on their budgets, particularly Dan. Dan and I both, we get about 12 of these each. So it's a bit of a spreadsheet dream for us for a couple of months. But we're making great progress, and I feel really good about where we are. So at the next meeting, I'm hoping to get into a little bit more detail. If I'm successful, you'll know because I'll go to council in April with my budget proposal for my staff salary proposal. And again, this was just actually a little background from Jerry Taylor that it makes total sense that you would have the salaries adopted prior to the budget so that I can go into the budget with some certainty about what I'm paying folks. So I'm working real hard to get that to you in April. But I'll bring that to the budget committee as well and talk with you about the proposed sort of minor reorganization that is going to come with that. I'll have an answer to the TLT. I'm also working with FCS right now to update the indirect cost study method. So I do want folks to be aware that that's the methodology that y'all have used for the last couple of years to determine the water fund transfer. And so we've updated that with fresh data from the last year. And so I'll be using that methodology again for this year. And I'll have hopefully the results from that in time for our meeting in April, but it may not be. We may see it at the first budget meeting. We're going to be applying that method to the building fund as well. So the way that I think the cleanest way to deal with the building fund is to create a separate building fund that we would do a transfer in from the general fund. And I'll talk in detail about this later, but just as a heads up, we'll transfer in funds from the general fund to cover the planning portion and the short-term rental portion of those positions. And then there'll be an indirect cost to the general fund from the building fund. So similarly to how the water fund works. So those will be some bigger changes that you'll see. And I just want to walk you through that methodology at the next meeting, hopefully. And if you have any questions, you know, I can invite Martin from FCS to help us with that. So those are my hopes for the next meeting, and then just maybe some end of year notes for the fiscal year. We are expecting to do potentially a supplemental for the building department, and that's largely because we underestimated the fees associated with building permits. So it's not actually a cost. It's just that, and I'll explain this more when we meet about this. But we have to pay the state a certain amount, it's 12% of the fees that we collect when we issue permits. So we have to estimate that as an expense. And that expense was underestimated significantly. So we are likely going to have to do a supplemental to cover that difference. What that means is that we just had way more development than we had budgeted for, and so we didn't budget enough money to go out to the state. So hopefully that makes sense. Doesn't cost the city anything. It's just that it was underestimated. So we're working.
So Layla, that brings up a question, I guess, is we're not the only ones that have underestimated our revenues from permits
Right.
across the state. So has the state had any discussions, and I don't know whether Scott has been hearing this, but has the state been having any discussions about what they're going to do with the surplus of monies? Are they, I mean, they're probably going to be rolling in dough, so to speak, because of those amount of permit activities that have occurred across the state. And it would seem appropriate for them to return some of those monies back to the local jurisdictions, or
I love how you think.
probably not likely, but
I would love that.
at least the discussion should be held that that they're going to have a whole surplus of money, and they have.
I agree. Here, I'm going to mute Scott so he doesn't disagree.
No, I just want to say on that. So the money sheet that Layla was speaking of is 12% that we collect on top of our permit fees. That money goes to the state to run the program, to provide e-permitting, support for e-permitting. And the excess money is used for years of not bringing in as much revenue. So it's to keep the staff level up to be able to provide the same level of service. I don't foresee money going back to the cities or jurisdictions.
Scott, do you know what the surplus actually is right now at the state for that?
I have no idea. I haven't looked into it. I just know we're probably, based on my numbers, we're probably about $23,000 short of what we budgeted for the 12% going to the state. And it's just a pass through. It's a pass through cost.
Right. When you say short, you mean that we've actually got 23,000 more than we anticipated from the building permit fees?
For the 12% that goes to the state,
Correct.
and I'm trying to project, I'll know at the end of the month, that exact shortfall, but right now, we're about $14,000 short in the budget for what we paid already this year.
Yeah.
So we'll budget a little differently next year.
Yeah, but I know from other efforts that I work with the state on where they take and slice it out of the pie to do some other things that I'm involved with that, you know, sometimes they're negotiable. So, but the cities that have to get together and say, hey, look, you guys have generated way more than you thought you were going to generate. And, you know, that should be shared. That shouldn't be something you're just throwing into their coffers. Anyway.
I agree. He's just talking about the 12%, Scott. Don't worry.
I think the 12% would go back to the applicants, not the city or jurisdiction.
We have a different.
I'm going to mute you now. I'm just kidding.
May I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we haven't talked about the water utility. I believe the last rate increase was 2014. Just a few years ago, the city council resolved to continue to raise the rates to be competitive and to cover expected future costs. Dan has just rolled out the updated water plan, which has 76 projects that are over $6 million, plus the sustainability projects, some of which will be paid by the state, total of $13 million. So shouldn't the council be raising the rates in anticipation of those projects? You're smiling.
Layla, you want me to take that?
Sure, Dan.
So
Tread
yes.
carefully.
So yes, we've been watching those numbers very carefully. And so after this budget is formulated, put together, we are going to be working on a rate study and working with a third-party agency to develop that study. And then from there, we'll know if we need to raise the rates or if we keep on the same plane. We don't know until that gets here.
And when you provided us with that data, then we'll be able to take some action at the council level.
Yep, exactly.
Has there been any word on the street relative to the infrastructure plan and bill, and whether any of those monies are going to filter down to local jurisdictions like our reservoir cost or replacement cost, water line replacements, things like that? Any street improvements? I mean, there's a lot of money there. It would seem like that somebody should be talking about how that money is going to be funneled down.
I haven't heard of anything yet being funneled down to the city levels. I would be surprised, pleasantly surprised, if it does make it this way, but most of the time it doesn't make it past the county levels. And that's what we've seen historically in the past when these big federal bills come through.
Any other?
Awful quiet. What's next?
Well, you know, honestly, this was supposed to be what it was, which was very useful. But just a discussion, get you guys thinking about how we can do a better job moving forward. I think I had the last agenda item was sort of goals and spending priorities. So just to give you a sense of, you know, my goals are really going to be tied to council's goals. So level up Manzanita, how we do that. We'll have some projects included in this year's budget. The budget forward work, I did want to talk about that briefly before we left. One of the things I want to do is establish a budget, what was I going to call it? a budget. Jerry, help me out. We had a great word.
Revenue diversification.
Revenue diversification.
Whoa.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my filing cabinet's a little full today in my brain. So Revenue Diversification Committee, and I'm not joking. So I really want to set this committee up, and my goal would be to have a counselor who can serve as chairperson on this committee, and they'd be working pretty closely with me. And then I would like to have 1 to 2 members of the budget committee on that committee, and then 2 community members at large. So I just want to throw that out there to this committee, and I was hoping we could have a discussion about that. And maybe I could point to a counselor or ask somebody to step up to help take that on. Because this committee, I think, is something I imagine being in play for some time, you know, kind of helping solve one of the biggest issues we have as a community, which is how to diversify our revenue. So it's a bit of a commitment, but I think an important one. So I was hoping we could have a discussion about that right now. And if I could get potentially someone to step up as the chair, I could start to move forward with the formation of that committee.
So Layla, are you asking for somebody to step up now to lead that, or is that sometime in the future?
Well, I think it'd be good to get a sense from the committee now, and I would like to know just generally, is the budget committee open to this, you know, supportive of this idea? And if so, I would like to start moving forward with whoever on the council wants to step into that role and start to form that committee and go through the steps.
Well, from the council standpoint, I think it's an excellent and actually critical need for the city of Manzanita. So I would strongly support that.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. It's a very important thing that we got to take a look at, because we all know our income is so lopsided right now where it comes from. So if some counselor wants to step forward and say that's a piece of interest that they'd like to get involved in. If not, I'll be talking to each of you privately. We'll find somebody that'll do it.
Well, I'm more than happy to serve in that role, as long as I'd be joined by some of the talent on the budget committee, as well as the community at large.
That would be excellent.
Great. Well, you're on, and barring any objections, Councilor Tonjes. That would be great, Councilor Spegman. Maybe you and I can meet between now and the next pre-budget committee meeting. And between now and then, we are missing one person from our budget committee. Folks can consider if they want to step in on that subcommittee role. It will be more involved probably than your budget committee role, because we'll probably be meeting minimally monthly, is my guess, once we get really rolling. So, and probably for a year or two, honestly, if we're going to be real about it. So just know that that's the commitment, but it's super important. So anyway, so think through that. I'll work with Councilor Spegman on next steps for starting to get geared up to establish that committee, and doing outreach to get folks from the community to get involved too. So, this is so exciting.
Layla, I certainly have no objection to that, and I don't know if you want 2 counselors. If you want another budget committee member on there that's not a counselor, that's fine and great. My only reluctance in participating is that I'm a bit of a radical when it comes to taxes. I don't mind paying them. I don't mind charging them. I don't mind SDCs. I mean, I guess I'm not as tax or participation averse as logically the average taxpayer would be, but I've been a proponent of increasing SDCs for many years, and I think that there's a lot of development. There are a lot of development activities happening in the town that should be generating and paying for themselves more than they are.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. Great.
Would there be a possibility of having two counselors on that committee?
Yeah, obviously no more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be great.
obvious
That'd be
reasons.
terrific. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can, let's think about it over the next month, and then we can perhaps identify the other two folks at the next meeting. Please email me if you're interested or have an interest, so I can kind of keep track of who's interested. 'Cause,
Leila,
that would be a good way to start.
Leila, could you restate how long you think that this might go on again, this committee? It seems like it should be a lot shorter time.
Well, it could be between, I think, 6 to 18 months, depending on the extent. So there's quite a bit of work, I think, that's going to go into this. What I'm envisioning, honestly, is a full, and I want to work with the committee to establish the scope of work on this, but is a full evaluation of all the city's current revenue sources, all the city, which includes enterprise, fees, technology, everything. And then what are we missing? And then where can we fill those gaps? And then we might have some larger, more strategic asks that we need, because we have everything from fees we can charge for to additional levies. And so it might be in phases, Jim. So it might be that we have kind of first phase looking at fees, for example, and concurrently looking at other revenue sources. But I just don't want, I want to be very clear with the committee and with the community too, that this is not a quick fix, that there's a lot of, and I know you know that it's going to take some thought and effort, and really some deep community conversations around some of the funding sources that we may need in order to sustain the level of service we have as the city grows. So I just don't want to give it short shrift and be like, we can get this thing done in a few months. I think to do it right, it's probably going to take longer than that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not generally thrilled with hiring a bunch of consultants, but in this case, it seems like it's completely necessary. And have we set aside some monies to be able to hire what probably is going to be a fairly expensive thing? It seems going forward, and I'm going to be I'll be a cheerleader for this group, certainly, and maybe weighing in from the peanut gallery. But I would like to see it be really pretty comprehensive in the sense of how much money could we anticipate generating by various alternative revenue streams? How much money are we generating right now that we could modify by improving the way we're collecting our monies? I mean, all the components that talk about how to make money, if you will. And that's going to take somebody with some pretty strong financial background and mathematical skills. And so have you got some thoughts relative to that in terms of the companies out there that can do that and how much that's going to cost us?
Yeah, thank you. I agree completely, 100%. And yes, I do. I have actually a call scheduled later, not later this month, but early next with a consultant, just to sort of ballpark a scope and what that might cost so that I can put some, have that be part of my budget proposal. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with that, unless there are any other questions, this has been incredibly helpful for me. So I do want to thank everyone for taking the time to come today and sit through this. I know it's a new thing, but I hope we will kind of continue a tradition in years forward of just connecting before the first budget committee meeting. And then I think afterward, a practice of evaluating how it went and how we can always do better. I think every year we can learn something new. So I'll be looking to you to help make even this year better and next year as well. So
Leila, can I make some closing comments before we sign off?
absolutely.
You know, I've served on the budget committee for many years during my service as councilman and as a city mayor. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited about this year's budget. During the last 9 months, I've gotten to know Layla quite well, I think, and we've developed a good working relationship. And she's experienced and a hardworking city manager who loves our community. And I'm really looking forward, as I know you guys are too, to working with her on her first budget. So I thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Layla, it was a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And this was a good idea. And so, does anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
Yeah, I'd like a few words.
Certainly. Hello?
I don't think there's any, I think that was background noise, I think.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, and with that, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. See you next
Thanks,
month.
everyone.
You.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.